we need to go below the waterline of the iceberg in terms of I'm not just coming to work and doing something to get results, but there's a whole layer of my belief systems, my values, my habits, my perspectives, my assumptions that are driving the results that we're giving. Hi, I'm Jennifer Britton, and welcome to the CoachingMany Podcast. I've been on a mission for the last 20 years to expand the coaching conversation to many. Along with my co-host, Evana, we're going to be exploring coaching as it relates to conversations, connection, and change in both personal and professional settings. CoachingMany is about creating empowering and thought-provoking spaces for conversation which strengthen relationships and enhance results. Throughout the CoachingMany podcast, we'll share tools, practices, and approaches to support you in your conversations, one dialogue at a time. So welcome back, Evana. Here we are at our 4th episode of season 1 here at the CoachingMany podcast. We're coming together for a really exciting topic that I know is integral for your work and also my work and the work that we do together at Potentials Realized. So today's topic, all about results and relationships, because we know in the world of change, whether it's individual change, group change, team change, we need to be looking at both results and relationships. Welcome back. What are you excited about today?
I'm excited about, and thank you. It's great to be back in this great conversation with you. And I'm really excited about having this conversation because it's not in isolation. These two pieces fit together. And I know even looking back at my journey and even looking back at my strengths, and that's why I do relationship coaching, but you do have to take into consideration those outcomes that you're actually wanting to have in that conversation to be able, like relationship as a standalone is not effective. Results without relationship isn't effective. So I'm looking forward and I'm excited about exploring this conversation with you, Jen, and with our listeners.
Yeah. And I think for our listeners today, right, this is going to be something that they've been hearing us talk about in different ways. You know, I first introduced this concept actually way back in From One to Many, that team coaching is all about supporting a team in results and relationships. So that was 2013. And I think here we are, 2024, having gone through several years of work where the focus has really been get the results. And we are now seeing, as podcast listeners may have caught on some of our earlier versions, just endemic burnout. We have 42% rate of burnout in Canada. And part of the research is showing it's because people have been leaning too much into getting the things done versus focusing on how do you work through others to make it happen. Yeah. And that's been sort of a piece, for those that have listened to the Remote Pathways podcast, we talked a lot about a couple of years ago, like how are you boosting the relational fabric? How are you making sure that that's integral? So today, results, relationships, group and team coaching. Why don't you kick us off? Like, when you think about results and relationships in your work, you do a lot of work with women and change. Set the context for us. What are you seeing in the conversations that you're supporting right now?
Sure. Thanks, Jen. So in terms of the relationships and results, I think I'm actually going to start just with this point in mind is, we talk about teams, but in the work that I do, a lot of it actually relates to, it's not a professional team, but a family unit, whether they are, dissolving oftentimes, but there's like loved ones, like that relationship with your ex, right? And all that stuff. And I think I'm going to add another layer to it, which is also like in terms of that relationships and those results is that being true to yourself. Like 2023, the word of the year was authenticity. Right? So really, who are we, regardless of the realm that you are in the conversation of many with? Who are you? Are you standing in who you are so you can show up effectively in relationships? So you're actually showing up true to yourself and true to what the group or the team, if it's professional, or your family, in a personal unit. So that way you can actually get those results. So to me, they're very much overlapping, but underneath all of it, in my humble opinion, is who are you? And I'm going to broaden this even as a coach of CoachingMany or a coach of one-to-one. Who are you as a coach?
Yeah.
right? Are you actually authentic, and are you actually standing in your strength and who you are, so that way you can show up for what's actually wanted and needed in the conversation? So I think that's really, for me, a big part of this conversation, to really, like, the foundation to get effective, to build effective relationships and to get those results that we want, is really, who are we as a coach, as a group coach, as a leader? Although I work with people in a personal transition, a lot of these beautiful women and souls are professionals. And how
Yeah.
you do one thing often is how you do everything. So I know the work that I'm doing with these beautiful women is going to have a trickle effect beyond their family dynamics, beyond their friendships. It's going to overflow. And so I know we're going to be talking about the layers and the personal settings and professional settings. In some ways, it's not that different. It's not that different, because our participants, in some contexts, could be in team coaching, but in other contexts, it's, personal coaching, but they're still in the systems conversation or the dynamics. I call it relationship dynamics.
Yeah, I think, again, we just, like you said, to spotlight, we bring who we are to any conversation, whether part of a group of leaders, whether we are part of leading a team. And so how are we showing up? And I think that's what we want to bring and spotlight today. Where are you focusing? How are you showing up? So there's a piece of this around presence, right? That's what we would call it. We'll do further episodes. And many of you, when I was hearing you speak, Ivana, I immediately went to, our work around activating your group and team coaching superpowers. How are you showing up? Because we do know that coaches have a different preference in terms of how they're coaching. Are they coaching to results, or are they also coaching to relationships? And I think, again, as you think about your own journey as a group or team coach, it can be, sometimes very seemingly easy to coach to goals, to coach to accountability. But how do people really get those results? And that's where, again, for those that are familiar with my writing, we need to go below the waterline of the iceberg in terms of, I'm not just coming to work and doing something to get results, but there's a whole layer of my belief systems, my values, my habits, my perspectives, my assumptions that are driving the results that we're giving. So we'll talk further in further episodes about the iceberg, but we don't just show up getting results. There's a whole process. And again, that's what makes coaching distinct. It's how do we start to unpack what is driving our results or leading us to aim for results. And if we're just focusing on that piece, what about the relational piece? We've got to really look at who we are in relationship, because it's not just a one-off, for sure.
Yeah. And I'm going to loop in a couple just very quickly without discussing it a lot. But if we go back to the previous episodes, and if you haven't caught them, because this one stood out, go back and listen to them, because we talked about that trust, safety, and connection piece, right? We touched about those 4 elements of goal setting, awareness, action, and accountability. Yeah. And this does play into this conversation. You're right. It's not only about the goal. It's not only about the action, but it's also about helping our participants even have awareness of things that might be subconscious that are blocking them and getting the results that they want, or having the relationships, that depth, that intimacy, whether it be with a loved one, a team member, a boss.
Yes.
So these are very dynamic concepts. And I think, our core competencies that as coaches are really, if we think about it, even you touched on presence. That's one of our core competencies, but also how are we listening as coaches? But even how are we supporting our participants to understand their listening of their team member? At CTI, we learned 3 levels of listening.
Yeah.
Right. And I see it in our personal dynamics. I see it when I am not actually present and listening to my partner or to my loved ones or to my peers, right? So it's very, so there's so many layers to this, and it's fundamental. And I think it's, if I can just say, it's important for us to have that awareness for ourselves, because if we don't have that awareness ourselves as coaches, we aren't going to be able to be as effective as we want to be. We're not going to be able to have the impact we want as coaches with our participants, one-on-one, many group team.
Yeah. And I love that. And again, to keep it simple, right, which is one of the number one principles, let's make it also practical. So, I'm sure listeners are like, whoa, there's so many layers. There are so many layers. So we're talking presence, we're talking results, we're talking relationships, but let's make it really real. Let's talk about a couple of situations where coaches, like you said, as a coach, I need to be aware of what tools do I have in my backpack? Am I focusing more on helping this client, whether they're an individual, group, or team, get results? Or am I also bringing in the piece around what are your relationships and how are the relationships influencing it? So again, let's talk groups, group coaching, series of individuals with a common interest coming together to journey and explore topics, issues, themes, goals that are important to them. So what are you seeing right now? Like, again, I think when I think of my group coaching work, I either think of entrepreneurs working with entrepreneurs to expand their business, or I might think about groups of new leaders or seasoned leaders coming together to share experience. When you think about group coaching, let's use some real examples so that we can talk about here's what a coach might do if they're focusing more on relationships versus results. So let's give another scenario. You do a lot around retreats and women and change. So what might a group, who would be in that group or what would they be working on, Evana?
Sure. So in terms of I actually identify myself and label myself as a relationship coach, right? Because core to my work is relationships. And it is that individual woman who is going through a major life transition. And so from a group coaching context, a big part of what I really will say create in the container is actually having that connectedness amongst them, that they're not on this journey alone.
Yes.
And so it doesn't mean that they have to do everything the same way and they all have to move through the program at the same pace. But there is that relatedness, there is that connection, there is that empathy, because that's really something, especially when there is a major change, whether it be corporate or personal, that sense of community, that sense of, okay, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And I also, and this has really been my development and you always have to be mindful in group coaching, especially what are the individual participants' goals? What does success look for them? And this is where we say this in group coaching essentials. We do have to be a little bit of the chameleon, and we do have to have certain things in our setup of how we offer our programs, to be able to ensure that the group is moving through and getting the results and keeping that momentum. But also there's also that individual connection and allowing the participant to actually be able to connect to themselves and what they need in the relationship to themselves and where they are in that transition. And I think this is relevant even in a leader going through a transition or even a new leader, is that space to be able to connect with where am I? What do I want? And what are the steps for me? And I'm going to say it can absolutely be done. It's actually magical. It's inspirational in group coaching, when others are witnessing, we witness as coaches, but then you also have your peers who are on a similar journey, actually witnessing your transformation, witnessing your growth, celebrating your progress.
Yeah. Yeah. And, what I'm really connecting with here is the word connection, right? Results, relationships, connectivity. And, results are results, they're goals typically, but relationships are all about that sense of community, of connection, of collaboration, of who we are individually, who we are together, right? Which takes us more to that team coaching realm. And I think a lot of teams, this may be even more straightforward than in a group coaching context, because in a team, typically it's like teams exist to produce results, right? That's why teams exist. They are the engines of business in most organizations.
Yeah.
And so how do we also help that team slow it down? So it's not just gaining the awareness of who they are, but it's also looking at how do you operate together? How do you capitalize on your strengths? How do you work to the styles and the pace and the best time of day to get the results so that it's easy rather than, people fighting and struggling to try and make it work. So that conversation is not about the goal. It's about who we are and who we are together, who I am individually, what I bring, what I need from the others around me in order to do my best work, not just in a 3-week window, right? It's like in a sustainable way. And so I think there's a piece around this, both results and relationships, but it's the sustainability. So back to the burnout, it's really, what is the system asking of individuals as well? So for those that are listening, right, like think about where your work is taking you right now, because you can apply this results relationships notion of whether it's a continuum or other. Where are you spending your time? What is your bias? For me as a coach, I'm always about, performance. It's about, let's get it done. Let's build your business. Let's do it. And what I've learned over the last 22 years is you've got to slow it down, right? It's slow down to speed up, just like Kahneman said. And we've got to do that. And we've got to look at relationally, how are we leaning into that relational system as well?
Yeah. And a big part of my work, because oftentimes the women, it's just where I work is in women in relationship transition. A lot of that in terms of relationships, even in that moment of change, in that moment of difficulty, a big part of the work I do is supporting women connect. Who is your relationships? Who can you lean on? Where can you go? Like building, redefining your support system, because it just dissolves. And oftentimes, there is self-worth, there is confidence that gets compromised in, and I'm going to say this, in job loss, it happens too. So part of this whole piece around relationships, and I'll let you touch on it in terms of teams, but that whole piece around who are you leaning in on? How are you building those relationships? What matters to you in those relationships? How are you contributing to them? But also, how are you discerning that this is actually going to support me in the results I want? In the vision I have. We haven't touched on vision, right? But how do relationships and results fit in the vision, right? The vision of a team. And I'm going to say this before I pass it back to you is, I think it's worth mentioning, it wasn't explicitly stated, but in teams, we're coming together as a team. Individuals are secondary. So when you mention the whole piece of you as an individual leader, but we're in that context of team, keep me honest here, is you're asking yourself, who am I as a leader for the growth, for the benefit of the team, not of myself? I'm doing some group coaching in a professional context right now in Italy, but it's very clear. They're talking about their own individuals, but that's not the case in teams. So this is even a conversation of relationships and results as it relates to bringing a team together. And how does that actually work as a team? So you don't lose who you are as an individual, but you come with a framework and approach of team first, individual second, like you said earlier, for those sustainable results, for those sustainable relationships, for that matter.
Absolutely. Because teams are together 24/7, whether we like it or not. In a business context, you're thinking about work more often than not. And so back to, really thinking through about, and this is an interesting thing, right? And so again, I'll show my team bias is like, are we really that different in a team than outside of a team? It depends on what kind of team you're in, right? And so my former world of work, it was extreme teams. There was no distinction. There was no discernment. I was who I was. And I think that's how I operate in the rest of the world. People call me very transparent, but I don't think it's being transparent. I think it's just, I show up as who I am. There's very little masking, very little, it's just working globally. It's not possible to have multiple personas and retain your sanity. That's a pretty strong statement. But I think working across borders and boundaries in environments where you might be the outsider, you have to be who you are. You find out very quickly who you are. And so again, I think this is why I'm so passionate about this piece, because who are we and how are we showing up in each of these conversations? And what do we need to round out? What do we need to, again, adjust, dial up, dial back? Because different business contexts will require different things. Different cultural contexts will require different things. Is the culture that you're operating within individualistic or collaborative, right? I think about the work that I do with North American teams. You have Mexico, Canada, the US. Many North American teams forget there are 3 main cultures, but there are.
Yeah.
And if you look at how we operate as 3 different nations, there's a lot of distinction there. So I don't want to overcomplicate this, but I think it provides us in the team coaching realm an opportunity to really be thinking about more than just this notion of results versus relationships. What is the driving force? And yes, even if we are a team, where is the team based geographically? How is that influencing this notion? Do you think, again, the saving grace for me as someone who has been very results oriented all my life, I spent 15 years working in the Caribbean, very relational. What would a weekend look like? You would spend time with your neighbors. You did business through the relationships that you had.
Absolutely.
And that's very different than, say, my current context here in Canada, where you might wave, but the unit is the family unit, which is very different than a community unit at times. So again, invitation to think, and even as I'm saying, in Canada, I live in 3 different communities, and each is really different. So here it is more community, where I spend my winter months. It's a blend. I think it's more family, and certainly Toronto is very individualistic. It is known as one of the hardest cities to actually integrate into, and that's where I grew up. Which to make a long story short, in all of this too, is how are you showing up, and how do you know yourself? So.
Yeah. If I can just share a personal experience, so I've lived in 3 continents in the last 6 years, 7 years.
Yeah.
And so being born in Canada to an Italian, both Italian parents, very much, my family was my community. My relatives were my community. And then I left the front door of my home and went in and immersed myself into a community of North American. And so, that was the culture shock, right? And I'm saying this, and I'll loop into what is the value of this, because we do have to be mindful of this as coaches. We do need to be mindful of who are the people in our conversation, and how does who they are and their story and what they bring affect the group conversation, the team conversation.
Yes.
Fast forward, then I moved to Costa Rica. I spent 1.5 years in Costa Rica. That was all community and relationship. And I'll share this with you. I was going through a major personal transition, and I didn't realize how much nurturing, how much love I had. That really supported me in my own journey. And I value that.
Yeah.
They didn't know me from a hole in a wall, and yet they just held.
But Ticos will do that, right? And I've lived there as well, years and years ago. And that's more of that Central and South American culture, which has at the heart this. Yeah, it's a community, and you are part of a community, whether you are there for a short time, a mid-time,
absolutely,
a long time, or eat that.
Yeah, there's a footprint in my heart. I stay connected to those beautiful souls because there's a part of them that got activated in me in my healing, in my own journey of healing and reinvention, I'll say. And then I came to Italy.
Your roots.
Right? My roots. And so I came exactly for that. But the power of family, but this is where, again, culturally, the South, which is where my family is, versus the North have 2 different philosophies. 2 different approaches. So I'm being very sensitive when I'm in conversation of who I'm in conversation with. And I think I say this because I think if we take it 3 steps back in terms of our coaching many conversations, whether you're a business leader and you've got a team and you're in that coaching conversation, or a team coach or a group coach, we can't just assume or have bias that how we have lived, what is important to us is important to our participants. And I want to go back to something because it's very fundamental in what you said. Is you said, you're transparent and you are strong in who you are. And I know in the work that I do with women in transition, a big part of that work is helping them reconnect to that.
Yes.
And oftentimes peeling the layers of who they think they had to be or who they were for relationship, whether it be work, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I say that because we have to be mindful of, maybe, at least it is in my work, being mindful of, is there a layer in your work around helping people connect to who they are so they can have the relationships that they want and have the results that they want? It's very obvious that that came to you very naturally, and your diverse experiences with the UN and the Caribbean, globally, really, you carried that strength, and it's who you are. I had a different experience. I'm now coming into who I am.
Yeah.
And so if you and I, just looking at you and I, if we've had two different experiences, how about the people in our rooms?
Yeah. And
whether it be one-on-one or not. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
And I love that, because I think that raises the awareness of, how are we showing up, supporting, even in a group or team coaching conversation, people connecting with their self on multiple levels, because it will influence. And I think again, even with the notion of keep it simple, we can't keep it simple in a CoachingMany situation. There are so many layers. So what is naturally coming to me is, this is where our practices as a group and team coach become paramount. Why ongoing learning, ongoing resourcing, today it would be like reflective practice, right? But what is reflective practice? It is as simple as, after every touch point, stepping back and saying, how did I show up? How did everyone else show up? How did people in this group react? What worked? What didn't work? And not just bringing our perspective, but also making sure that we're asking those in the room.
Yeah.
What, again, we use the 3 questions, which have now become like, it is the way group coaches do it. It's just, okay, so what worked well? What are you taking away? What should we do differently? And very much really being listening to what is truly emerging. Because I think a lot of new group coaches are like, I didn't expect them to say that. Okay, so what assumptions need to be parking? How do we need to be, quote unquote, in the coaching world, unattached to the outcome? It really is exponential in a group context. And then a team, still reusing the same questions, but really noticing as well, how are people leaning in, right? Back to, have we built trust? Have we built more connection in this conversation? Or sometimes you don't. And so what is at play? What is happening? And sometimes I think it can be the individual shifts that are happening, the ahas, which it's like, ooh, okay, I need to look at myself, resource myself, so that I can then lean into the team as a system.
Absolutely.
So, and again, go for it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and that does go back to that listening, and where are we listening from?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And what are we listening
from? And what are we listening for? Like, just those 3 questions that you touched on, like, that's that feedback, And I'm going to say this, a lot of people may have challenges with feedback. We deal with this in the practicum program, right?
Oh, yes.
A lot of people, I don't want to share and I'm like, but that's how people grow. So what is your relationship as a coach, whether it be one-on-one or even group or team, your relationship to feedback? Because again, and I'm going to put it on the lens of people going through change, but both results and relationships, even for yourself as a coach, and I know I'm going to let you bring in the whole approach to that continuum. So I'm going to let you kind of speak to that, but there is that element that has to be considered, so we again are always showing up in service of our participants, whether it be one-on-one, group coaching, team coaching, or just as a business leader in the conversation of many.
Yeah. And I'll add, we're showing up in service, but we're also showing up in curiosity, because part of anchoring feedback is, it's not just feedback for us, right? In a CoachingMany situation, it's not just about the coach. In a group, it's about feedback to group members as well. What value did I get in spending time today with you as a peer, with you as a coach? There is so much in there that's beyond just the coach. Coaching teams, again, who is the feedback for? It shouldn't be for the coach. It's for the team system. What is working? What do we need to be paying more attention to? What do we want to be doing? So again, I think there's a layer of this conversation as well is, noticing back to presence. How are you showing up? What is your stance? What is your role within this conversation as well? And so it is about results. It is about relationships, change and the process of change, whether it's individual or macro change. It's going to have us on a bit of a zigzag some days.
Yeah.
But what we wanted to do in bringing this as our 4th episode here is getting you to think about, what does it mean to coach for relationships? What does it mean to coach for results? What is needed in the different contexts? And that could be in a one-on-one, in a group, in a team. I think some of the other themes we've had here today too is the presence. And for those that have taken our group and team coaching superpower quiz and then gone on to do the Activate program, very much that whole learning journey is about, how are you showing up naturally? Like, you're a spiral lighthouse coach, right? So you're all about layers, and part of the layer and part of your super strength is, really creating that safe harbor. Safety is only created relationally. It's not about driving for results. I'm the creative tool master, right? And so part of the creative tool master is about, ooh, what do I have in my back pocket? And for me, years ago, I probably would have put myself more as a catalytic firecracker. Let's get results. Let's get the boldness.
Yeah.
That's not enough. We need both things. We need both the relationships and the results. So just be noticing, like, even as your superpower, because so many people are starting to track that now. What is your bias? And is there need to really look at, how do I hold both? How do I ensure that in these conversations, I'm holding the space for both? So our resource today, right? One of the things we're going to be doing, and you'll find these through our different show notes, is drawing your attention to different resources. And for those that are following today's conversation around results and relationships, we've touched on a couple of different concepts that I've written more extensively about. So this is linked to the iceberg. You'll start seeing the iceberg back in effective virtual conversations, and also a lot in reconnecting workspaces. Reconnecting workspaces as well. I talk about this in the team level. What are we aiming for? Is it just all about KPIs and key performance indicators, or OKRs, which is objectives and key results? Like, even think about that languaging. It is not relational. It is
Yeah.
So how do we also then really look at boosting that relational fabric, which is generative, it is reflective, all of the things that, really, I think in 2024, we're putting a stance around. I'm going to take us back, though, from one to many, right? What is team coaching? Team coaching is about coaching the team around results and for relationships. We cannot do one without another. So, Evana, I think as we come to the close on this, we've opened a lot of other pathways, that we can be going down. What do you want to mention or leave as an inquiry as we wrap down this episode?
Yeah. I think another thing that I really heard was central is around that, who am I as a coach? Like that connecting to that authenticity, or as you said, you show up as who you are. And so just like we do this, just represencing a couple of tools, just as we do this for our one-on-one group and team coaches, often looking at values, looking at strengths, using that for ourselves. Like, these are some tools that you can use not only for your groups, but also helping yourself to reconnect to, who am I? What are my values? What are my strengths? And connecting the fact that I'm a spiral lighthouse and I'm a relationship, and you lean more to results, but I'll tell you, I had a breakthrough in that self-awareness in that program with you, that I bring a lot more intentionality to it, but I also know my limit. And so I'm going to just share this. We're not here to do the work alone. Many of you are likely considering partnering, like you and I do well in this, because your focus and your strength is results and relationships, but mine is more so relationships. So taking that consideration of when you are working with a fellow coach, when you are considering, partnering with someone, how does that complement? Again, always thinking about the group or the team in mind. Where is that complementary place? So you can be conscious and sensitive and curious with results and relationships.
Yeah. And again, that intentionality and the integral nature of we don't do this alone. So we will do future episodes on co-coaching. Many of you are asking, when is the next co-coaching essentials coming up? And so that is coming up this fall. And really, who can we be together when you're partnering with someone else? Because we can grow and it still may not be a natural strength, right? Like I have learned over 22 years to be more relationally focused, but it is more effort than my natural DNA of results.
Yeah.
So we really hope that you enjoyed today. Again, results and relationships are foundational to the work of the Coach of Many, and we do want to get you thinking about what that is in lead up to our next episode around intentionality. So stay tuned. If you've been enjoying us, please take a moment, definitely rate it, review it, share it within your networks, because even to relationships, right? I think the strength of a team coach is relational. Definitely the strength of a group coach is relational. So the more we're talking about this as a community, the stronger it is. Well, Evana, I've enjoyed today. Any final thoughts as we go to close?
No, I think we'll leave it at this. It was a great conversation, and I just hope that people have spurred some thought around some of these ideas and really allowing yourself to see in each dynamic that you are coaching in, where are you leaning? Yeah. And maybe is there an opportunity to bring in a peer colleague to support you in service of what you stand for this particular Coaching Many conversation?
Well said. So you can find us online at CoachingManyPodcast.com. You'll get linked immediately or directed to the latest episodes if you're not on a podcast player, but you will find us on all the different podcast players, including Audible. I did want to put a shout out to that because I think that is really fun. And Audible IT, which is thanks to you in Italy, as well as Audible CA, has picked up the feed. So however you hear us, let us know. And do also feel free to join us in our community calls. That is something we'll be continuing throughout the summer and into the fall. Drop in. Let's have a conversation around some of these concepts that we're touching on. All right. Well, be well, everyone. Take care. I enjoyed our conversation today. Bye, Evana.
Ciao. Bye.